Jonathan Ward was a man of extraordinary wealth, but an equally extraordinary loneliness. He sat in the opulent office of his sprawling estate, staring blankly at the polished mahogany desk. The diagnosis had been clear: advanced pancreatic cancer, untreatable, with months left to live. At 68 years old, he wasn't ready to go, but he knew better than to argue with time. What haunted him most wasn't death, but the specters of regret that crowded his mind. Chief among them was Emily, his only daughter. Emily had been the light of his life until they had a falling out years ago. She had chosen love over loyalty to his rigid expectations, marrying a man Jonathan deemed unsuitable. He had disowned her in anger, his pride outweighing his paternal instincts. When news came of her death in a car accident, Jonathan had buried the pain under layers of business deals and charity galas, never allowing himself to grieve properly. Now, with the sands of time slipping through his fingers, that pain resurfaced with a vengeance. Determined to find a purpose in his remaining days, Jonathan left his mansion one brisk November evening, wandering aimlessly through the city streets. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, perhaps redemption, perhaps just a way to feel alive. The city was alive with sounds and lights, yet in its darker corners, it bore a stark contrast to the luxury he knew so well. And it was in one of those corners that he saw her. The little girl sat huddled against a brick wall, her small frame barely visible under an oversized coat. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, and her tangled hair fell across her face. She couldn't have been older than 8. Something about her struck Jonathan deeply. Perhaps it was her hauntingly familiar green eyes or the way she clutched a broken necklace in her tiny hands, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. She flinched at the sound, her body stiffening like a frightened animal. "Go away," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Jonathan didn't move. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I just want to help." She looked up then, her gaze sharp and wary. Those eyes, they pierced something deep within him. "I don't need help," she said firmly, though her trembling hands betrayed her words. He crouched down to her level, careful not to invade her space. "My name is Jonathan. What's yours?" She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line before she muttered, "Lily." "Lily," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "Do you have somewhere to go, Lily? Someone to take care of you?" She shook her head, her defiance faltering for just a moment. "I had my mom, but she's gone." Jonathan felt a pang in his chest. "What about your dad?" "Never had one," she said quickly, her tone suggesting it was a subject she didn't want to discuss. He stood then, glancing around the dark street. A chill wind cut through the air, and he noticed how thin her coat was. "Come with me," he said gently. "I can give you food, a warm place to sleep." She eyed him suspiciously. "Why would you do that? What do you want?" Jonathan hesitated. He wasn't entirely sure of the answer himself. "Because no one should have to be alone out here," he said finally. "And because I can." Lily studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, she stood, her small hand still clutching the broken necklace. "Just for tonight," she said. "I'm not staying." "Fair enough," he said, offering a faint smile. Back at his mansion, Lily's eyes widened as she took in the grandeur of the place. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and the marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. She looked out of place against such opulence, her scrappy form a stark contrast to the elegance around her. Jonathan led her to the kitchen, where he instructed the chef to prepare something simple but hearty. As she ate ravenously, he watched her, a mix of emotions churning within him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen those eyes before, that there was something achingly familiar about her. After dinner, he showed her to a guest room, outfitted with a plush bed and soft blankets. She hesitated at the doorway, as if unsure she was allowed to step inside. "This is for me?" she asked. "For as long as you need it," Jonathan replied. Lily looked at him then, her green eyes softening just a fraction. "Thank you," she said quietly before retreating into the room. That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He sat by the fireplace, turning over the events of the day in his mind. Lily's presence stirred something within him, something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of responsibility, of connection. It was as if fate had placed her in his path for a reason. He glanced at the clock. Midnight had come and gone, but he didn't feel tired. Instead, he felt something he hadn't expected: hope. And for the first time in a long time, Jonathan Ward allowed himself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to make things right. The following morning, Jonathan found Lily sitting at the kitchen table, a bowl of cereal in front of her, untouched. Her hands played absently with the broken necklace she still clutched tightly, as if it were the only thing tethering her to the world. He noticed how small and fragile her hands looked and felt a wave of protectiveness rise within him. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice light but warm. He didn't want to scare her off. She shrugged without looking up. "The bed's too soft." "I'm not used to it." Jonathan allowed himself a small smile. "Give it time. You might find you like it." Lily finally glanced up, her green eyes sharp with a mix of curiosity and mistrust. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Jonathan hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. He could hardly explain the inexplicable connection he felt to her, a feeling he himself didn't fully understand. "Sometimes," he began slowly, "people come into your life when you least expect it. Maybe I needed you as much as you needed me." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she looked back down at her necklace. "My mom used to say things like that," she said softly. "She said people are like stars, crossing paths in the sky." Jonathan leaned forward, intrigued. "Your mom sounds like she was a very wise woman." "She was," Lily replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "She was my best friend." Jonathan's chest tightened. He could see the depth of Lily's loss etched in her every movement, every word. He knew that pain all too well, the kind that clung to you like a shadow. After breakfast, Jonathan decided it was time to learn more about her. He gently coaxed Lily to tell him about her life, careful not to push too hard. She spoke haltingly, revealing bits and pieces of her story. Her mother, Clara, had struggled to make ends meet after being abandoned by Lily's father. They had lived in a small apartment until Clara's sudden illness left them destitute. After her mother's death, Lily had been left to fend for herself, too proud and too scared to seek help. Jonathan listened intently, each detail striking a chord deep within him. As Lily spoke, she absent-mindedly twisted the broken necklace in her fingers. When Jonathan finally asked about it, her expression changed, softening slightly. "It was my mom's," she explained. "She said it was really special, but I don't know why. It broke a long time ago." "May I see it?" Jonathan asked gently. Lily hesitated, but eventually handed it over. Jonathan studied the delicate chain and the small, heart-shaped charm hanging from it. Something about it tickled the edges of his memory, but he couldn't quite place it. "It's beautiful," he said, handing it back. "Would you let me get it repaired for you?" She nodded, her fingers immediately curling around the necklace again. "I don't want to lose it." "You won't," he promised. As the days passed, Lily began to lower her guard, though cautiously. Jonathan made it a point to spend time with her, learning her likes and dislikes, discovering her sharp wit and her love for drawing. Her sketches, though rough, were full of life and emotion. He encouraged her, buying her supplies and setting up a small corner of his study where she could create. It was in these moments, watching her lost in her art, that he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in years: joy. But there was something else, too, something he couldn't ignore. The resemblance Lily bore to Emily was undeniable, and not just in her appearance. It was in the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the way she bit her lip when she was unsure. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to Lily's story than met the eye. Driven by this instinct, Jonathan made a discreet call to a private investigator he had worked with in the past. He asked for a thorough investigation into Lily's background, particularly her mother. He needed answers, though he wasn't entirely sure what he hoped to find. While waiting for the investigator's report, Jonathan took Lily shopping for clothes, an experience that was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. She seemed overwhelmed by the abundance, hesitant to ask for anything. It wasn't until he gently urged her to pick something she truly liked that she selected a simple, yellow sundress. When she tried it on and looked at herself in the mirror, Her face lit up in a way Jonathan hadn't seen before. It was a moment he would carry with him forever. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Lily turned to Jonathan and asked, "Do you have kids?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated before answering, the words heavy on his tongue. "I had a daughter," he said finally. "Her name was Emily." "What happened to her?" Lily asked, her voice soft with curiosity. She passed away a long time ago," Jonathan replied, his chest tightening at the admission. "We lost touch before that. It's one of my biggest regrets." Lily seemed to mull this over for a moment before nodding. "My mom said people make mistakes, but it doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're human." Jonathan felt a lump rise in his throat. "Your mom was a very wise woman," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. The investigator's call came late one night, waking Jonathan from a restless sleep. The man's tone was serious as he reported his findings. Clara, Lily's mother, had once gone by a different name, Clara Emily Ward. Jonathan's heart stopped. Emily had changed her name, likely to distance herself from him, but there was no doubt. Lily wasn't just a child in need. She was his granddaughter. Jonathan sat in stunned silence as the weight of this revelation settled over him. Suddenly, everything made sense. The connection he felt to Lily, the familiarity of her eyes, the way she seemed to fill a void he hadn't even realized was there. She was a part of Emily, a part of the daughter he had failed to protect. As he hung up the phone, Jonathan felt a mixture of emotions: shock, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. Lily was more than a chance encounter. She was his second chance, and he wouldn't fail her. Not this time. Jonathan spent the night pacing the length of his study, his thoughts racing. The realization that Lily was his granddaughter filled him with equal parts wonder and anguish. He couldn't help but see Emily in her strength, her resilience, and even her vulnerability. Yet with that recognition came the crushing weight of guilt. He had failed Emily. He had driven her away, allowed her to slip through his fingers, and now she was gone. But Lily was here, a living piece of Emily's legacy. He vowed then and there to protect her with everything he had. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke through the windows, Jonathan had made up his mind. He couldn't tell Lily yet, not until he fully understood her circumstances and what had led Emily to live the life she did. He needed time to process and to ensure that when he told Lily, it would be in a way that wouldn't overwhelm her. The following morning, he joined Lily for breakfast, doing his best to mask the whirlwind of emotions within him. She was cheerfully munching on toast, her face smudged with jam. It struck him how quickly she had started to seem at home, though she still clung to her necklace like a lifeline. That tiny, broken charm now seemed like a symbol of so much more, a thread tying her to her mother and, unknowingly, to Jonathan. "I was thinking we could go to the park today," Jonathan said, trying to keep his tone casual. Lily's eyes lit up. "Really? Can we bring my sketchbook?" "Of course," he replied, smiling. "You can draw whatever you'd like." The park was a bustling sea of life, full of children laughing, joggers passing by, and families enjoying the crisp autumn air. Jonathan watched as Lily ran ahead to find a good spot to sit and draw. She chose a bench under a sprawling oak tree and immediately began sketching the scene before her. Jonathan settled beside her, marveling at how focused she became when she drew, as if the world around her melted away. As he sat there, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was the private investigator again, calling to report on the details of Emily's life after she had left Jonathan's. He stepped away to take the call, listening intently as the investigator recounted Emily's struggles, how she had taken on menial jobs to support herself, how she had fought to keep a roof over her head, and how she had fiercely protected Lily from the hardships they endured. Jonathan's heart broke with each word. Emily had been so much stronger than he'd ever given her credit for. One detail stood out above the rest: the identity of Lily's father. The investigator revealed that the man had abandoned Emily before Lily was even born, leaving her to raise the child alone. He had no claim to Lily and no role in her life. The news brought Jonathan a strange sense of relief. It meant there was no one else but him to step into the role of protector and caregiver. When he returned to the bench, Lily looked up at him with a smile, holding out her sketch. What do you think? Jonathan took the drawing and studied it. It was a rough but poignant rendering of the park, with the towering oak tree in the foreground. In the corner, she had added a small figure. A man sitting on a bench, looking out at the park. It took him a moment to realize she had drawn him. "It's wonderful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have real talent." Lily beamed at the praise, her eyes sparkling with pride. For the rest of the afternoon, they strolled through the park, talking and laughing. Jonathan found himself cherishing every moment, every smile, every word. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the chance to be part of Lily's life, even if it was only for a short while. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Jonathan sat alone in his study, the broken necklace in his hand. He had taken it to a jeweler earlier that day to have it repaired and polished. The charm now gleamed, its once dull surface restored to its original shine. As he held it, memories of Emily flooded back. Her laughter as a child, the way she would hug him tightly around the neck, her fiery spirit that had so often clashed with his own stubbornness. He had been too proud, too blind to see what truly mattered, and now he had to live with the consequences. But Lily was his chance to make amends, to honor Emily's memory by being the grandfather Lily needed. He resolved to tell her the truth soon, but first, he wanted to ensure she felt secure and loved. He wanted her to trust him completely before he shared the secret that would change everything. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Jonathan spent every moment he could with Lily, taking her to museums, bookstores, and even a local art studio where she could experiment with new materials. He found himself marveling at her curiosity and intelligence. She soaked up everything like a sponge, her enthusiasm contagious. One evening, as they were sitting by the fireplace, Lily turned to Jonathan with a question that caught him off guard. "Do you think my mom would be proud of me?" Jonathan felt his throat tighten. "Of course she would," he said softly. "She'd be so proud of how brave and kind you are." Lily smiled, but her expression grew pensive. "I miss her," she whispered. Jonathan reached over, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "She's still with you, Lily, in your heart, and in everything you do." As Lily leaned into his side, seeking comfort, Jonathan felt an overwhelming sense of love and responsibility. He knew it was time to tell her the truth, but he also knew that the moment had to be right. He needed to approach it with care, ensuring that Lily understood she wasn't alone and that she had a family, someone who would stand by her no matter what. That night, as Lily slept soundly in her room, Jonathan began writing a letter. It was a letter to Emily, one he knew she would never read but that he needed to write. In it, he poured out his regrets, his sorrow, and his promise to care for Lily as fiercely as Emily had. It was a small step toward healing, but for Jonathan, it was a start. The morning dawned with a quiet stillness that seemed to echo Jonathan's racing thoughts. He woke earlier than usual, the letter he had written to Emily still sitting on his desk. Though it brought him some measure of peace, he knew the time for reflection was over. He needed to act. Lily deserved to know the truth, but he had to tread carefully. She had been through so much already, and he didn't want to risk overwhelming her. As he walked down the hall toward the kitchen, he could hear her humming softly, a sound that brought a smile to his face despite his nerves. She was standing on a stool, carefully pouring milk into her cereal bowl. She glanced up when she saw him and grinned. "Good morning," she chirped. "I made breakfast all by myself." "Good morning, Lily," he replied, ruffling her hair affectionately. "You're becoming quite independent." She nodded proudly, hopping off the stool and taking her bowl to the table. Jonathan joined her, feeling the weight of the conversation they needed to have pressing down on him. He didn't want to ruin the light-hearted moment, but he also knew there would never be a perfect time. "Lily," he began, his voice steady but soft, "I need to talk to you about something important." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by a cautious expression. "Am I in trouble?" No, not at all," he reassured her quickly. "It's just something I've recently discovered, and I think you deserve to know." She put her spoon down, her small hands folded in front of her as she waited for him to continue. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I've been trying to learn more about your mom and what happened to her," he said carefully. In the process, I found out something that connects us in a way neither of us expected. Lily tilted her head, her brow furrowing. What do you mean? He reached across the table and gently took her hand in his. Lily, your mom, Clara Emily, was my daughter. That makes you my granddaughter. The words hung in the air, their weight settling between them. Lily stared at him, her green eyes wide with shock. For a moment, she didn't speak, and Jonathan could feel his heart breaking as he waited for her reaction. You're my grandpa? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Jonathan said, his voice filled with emotion. I didn't know until recently. If I had known, I would have found you much sooner. Lily pulled her hand back, her gaze dropping to the table. Her expression was unreadable, and Jonathan's chest tightened with fear. Had he pushed her too far? Was she angry? Confused? He tried to give her space, but the silence was unbearable. Why didn't my mom ever tell me about you? She asked at last, her voice trembling slightly. Jonathan sighed. That's a complicated question, he admitted. Your mom and we had a falling out a long time ago. I made mistakes, Lily. Mistakes I wish I could take back. She chose to leave, and I let her. It's something I regret every single day. Lily looked up at him then, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Did you love her? More than anything, Jonathan said without hesitation. She was my world, and losing her was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. I wish I could have been there for her, and for you. Lily seemed to process his words, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. So, all this time, I had a family, and I didn't even know it? You still do, Jonathan said gently. You have me, and I promise, I'm not going anywhere. Her lower lip quivered, and she suddenly stood, running from the room. Jonathan sat frozen for a moment, unsure if he should follow. He decided to give her a little time but stayed close, his heart aching with every passing second. Finally, he walked toward her room, finding the door slightly ajar. Lily was sitting on the bed, clutching her repaired necklace to her chest. He knocked softly on the doorframe. Lily, may I come in? She didn't answer but didn't tell him to go away either. He took that as permission and stepped inside, sitting down on the edge of the bed. I know this is a lot to take in, he said gently. If you're angry or upset, it's okay. You can tell me. I'm not mad, she said after a long pause. I don't know what to feel. It's weird. You're my grandpa, but I don't even know you. Jonathan nodded, understanding her confusion. That's fair, he said. But we can change that. We have time to get to know each other, to build something new. Lily looked at him, her expression softening. You really want to be my grandpa? I really do, he said, his voice thick with emotion. More than anything. She hesitated, then reached out and took his hand. Okay, she said softly, but you have to promise me something. Anything, Jonathan said immediately. Promise you won't leave me, she whispered. Jonathan felt tears sting his eyes as he squeezed her hand. I promise, Lily. I'll always be here for you. She nodded, leaning into him as he wrapped an arm around her. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the truth settling between them but not feeling as heavy as before. In that quiet moment, Jonathan felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in years. They were two broken pieces, but together, they were starting to feel whole. In the days following their emotional conversation, Jonathan noticed a shift in Lily. She seemed quieter, more introspective, but she also began seeking him out more often. Whether it was to sit beside him while he read, or to ask him questions about her mother, her presence became a constant in his day. Jonathan welcomed it, doing his best to answer her questions honestly while being careful not to overwhelm her with the complexities of the past. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, Lily asked something that caught Jonathan off guard. What was my mom like when she was my age? Jonathan set his book aside, the memory of young Emily rushing back to him like a flood. She was curious, just like you, always asking questions, always exploring. She loved to draw too, though she was more into painting. I remember she once turned the entire dining room table into her art project. Paint everywhere. On the table, on the chairs, even on the dog. Lily giggled at the thought. What did you do? I was furious at first, Jonathan admitted with a smile. But then she showed me what she painted, a family portrait. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. She said it was her way of making sure we'd always be together, even when we weren't in the same room. Lily's expression grew thoughtful. Did you keep it? Jonathan's smile faltered. I wish I had, he said quietly, but I didn't understand how important it was at the time. I made a lot of mistakes, Lily. I didn't always see what mattered most. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm. I think she'd forgive you, she said softly. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. Thank you, Lily. That means more to me than I can say. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan worked tirelessly to ensure Lily's future would be secure. He contacted lawyers to draft the necessary documents, making him her legal guardian, and updated his will to include provisions for her care. Though he hadn't shared the full extent of his illness with her, he was acutely aware of his limited time and wanted to make every moment count. He also began introducing Lily to the world beyond his estate. They visited museums and galleries, places where her artistic spirit could flourish. Jonathan loved watching her eyes light up as she admired the exhibits, her sketchbook always in hand to capture the inspiration she found. It reminded him of Emily, of the joy she once found in creating something beautiful. One afternoon, they visited a gallery hosting a children's art workshop. Lily hesitated at first, standing nervously at the edge of the room while other children eagerly dove into their projects. Jonathan knelt beside her, offering an encouraging smile. You've got this, he said. Just do what you love. She nodded, summoning her courage, and joined the group. As she worked, Jonathan watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. She was finding her place, little by little, and he was grateful to witness it. When the workshop ended, Lily ran back to him, holding up her finished piece, a vibrant landscape filled with rolling hills and a glowing sunset. Do you like it? She asked, her eyes shining. It's incredible, Jonathan said, meaning every word. You have a gift, Lily. Her cheeks flushed with pride as she tucked the drawing carefully into her sketchbook. On the way home, she leaned against him in the back seat of the car, her exhaustion from the day's activities evident, but her happiness unmistakable. Jonathan wrapped an arm around her, cherishing the moment. Despite the growing bond between them, Jonathan couldn't ignore the shadow of his illness looming over their lives. His energy was dwindling, the pain in his abdomen becoming harder to ignore. He had been managing it with medication, but it was clear the disease was progressing faster than he had anticipated. He decided it was time to confront the truth head-on. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Jonathan met with his doctor in the quiet of his study. The prognosis was grim, but there was a glimmer of hope. A new experimental treatment, developed by a research team partially funded by Jonathan's own foundation, had shown promise in early trials. The odds of success were slim, but it was a chance, however small, to extend his time with Lily. Jonathan wrestled with the decision. The treatment would be grueling and came with significant risks. But when he thought of Lily, of her laughter, her resilience, and the way she had already transformed his life, he knew he had to try. For her, he would endure anything. The next morning, he sat Lily down at the kitchen table, his expression serious but calm. Lily, there's something I need to talk to you about. She looked up from her cereal, her brow furrowing. What is it? You know how I told you I'd always be here for you, he began. She nodded, her gaze steady. I meant that, he continued. But sometimes, life throws us challenges we don't expect. I've been dealing with an illness, and there's a treatment that might help me. It's not a guarantee, but I want to try it because I want to be here for you as long as I can. Lily's eyes filled with worry. Are you going to be okay? Jonathan reached across the table and took her hand. I'm going to do everything I can to be okay, he said firmly. And no matter what happens, I need you to know that you are the most important thing in my life. You've brought me more joy than I ever thought possible. She squeezed his hand tightly, her voice small but determined. I believe in you. Jonathan smiled, his heart swelling with love for this brave, extraordinary girl. Thank you, Lily. That means everything to me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations for the treatment. Jonathan kept Lily involved as much as possible, explaining things in terms she could understand without burdening her with unnecessary details. They spent their days together as usual, creating new memories while cherishing the ones they already had. On the morning of his first treatment, Lily surprised him with a drawing. It was a portrait of the two of them sitting together under the oak tree in the park. At the bottom, she had written in careful block letters, "You're my family." Jonathan felt tears welling up as he looked at the picture. "This is beautiful, Lily. Thank you." She hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around him with surprising strength. "You're going to get better," she whispered. As he left for the hospital, Jonathan carried the drawing with him, a tangible reminder of what he was fighting for. No matter what lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just living for himself anymore. He was living for Lily, for Emily, and for the family they had finally found again. The treatment began in a sterile hospital room, its stark white walls a sharp contrast to the warmth of Jonathan's home. As he settled into the reclining chair, nurses moved efficiently around him, attaching 4 lines and explaining the procedure in calm, practiced tones. Jonathan listened, nodding when appropriate, but his mind was elsewhere. His thoughts were with Lily, waiting anxiously at home under the care of a trusted housekeeper. He carried her drawing in the inside pocket of his jacket, feeling its reassuring presence against his chest. The first session was grueling. The experimental treatment, though promising, came with side effects that left Jonathan feeling drained and nauseated. As he returned home that evening, he found himself leaning heavily on his driver for support. Yet when he stepped through the door and saw Lily waiting in the foyer, her eyes lighting up as she ran to greet him, he straightened, mustering all the strength he could. "Grandpa!" she cried, throwing her arms around him. Jonathan hugged her tightly, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. "I'm home, Lily," he said, his voice soft but steady. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Did it hurt?" "Not too much," he lied gently, not wanting to worry her. "It's just going to take some time." Lily nodded solemnly, her hand slipping into his as she led him to the couch. "You should rest," she said, her tone matter of fact. "I'll bring you some water." Jonathan smiled as he watched her hurry off to the kitchen. In her own way, she was trying to take care of him, and it filled him with pride and gratitude. Despite everything she had been through, Lily's heart remained open, her capacity for love undiminished. Over the next several weeks, the routine became familiar. Treatment days were followed by long hours of rest, during which Lily would sit by Jonathan's side, drawing quietly or reading aloud from one of her favorite books. Though the physical toll was immense, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every moment he spent with Lily reminded him of what he was fighting for. One afternoon, as they sat together in the study, Lily looked up from her sketchbook and asked, "Do you think my mom would be proud of me?" Jonathan felt a pang in his chest. "I know she would," he said without hesitation. "Your mom loved you more than anything. She'd be so proud of how brave and kind you are." Lily smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I wish I could remember her better. Sometimes I feel like I'm forgetting her." Jonathan reached over and took her hand. "You're not forgetting her, Lily. She's a part of you, in everything you do. And I'll tell you as many stories about her as you want, so you'll always feel close to her." Lily nodded, her smile growing steadier. "I'd like that." As the weeks turned into months, Jonathan began to notice small improvements in his condition. The pain, once constant, started to ebb, and his energy slowly returned. His doctors were cautiously optimistic, and for the first time in a long time, Jonathan allowed himself to hope. He began making plans with Lily, talking about the future in ways that felt more real with each passing day. One morning, while they were having breakfast, Jonathan brought up an idea that had been on his mind. "Lily, how would you feel about going back to school?" Lily looked up from her plate, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "School?" "Yes," Jonathan said. "There's a wonderful school nearby with art programs I think you'd love. You'd get to meet other kids your age and make new friends." Lily hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. "What if they don't like me?" Jonathan leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Lily, you're an incredible person. Anyone would be lucky to know you. and I'll be right here to support you every step of the way." She considered this for a moment before nodding. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll try." Jonathan felt a surge of pride at her courage. He contacted the school that same day, arranging for a visit and ensuring they understood Lily's unique circumstances. When the day of the visit arrived, Lily clutched his hand tightly as they walked through the school's doors, her nerves evident in the way she glanced around. Jonathan stayed by her side, offering encouragement as she met the teachers and toured the classrooms. By the time they left, Lily's apprehension had begun to fade, replaced by a budding sense of excitement. "I think I might like it," she admitted as they drove home. Jonathan smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "I'm glad to hear that. I think you'll do wonderfully." As Lily settled into her new routine, Jonathan found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that fateful night he found her on the streets. She was thriving, her confidence growing with each passing day. And though his illness still loomed in the background, Jonathan felt a profound sense of peace. He had been given a second chance, not just with Lily, but with himself, and he intended to make the most of it. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lily presented Jonathan with a new drawing. It was a detailed portrait of their family, Emily, Lily, and Jonathan, all together in a field of wildflowers. The image was simple but deeply moving, capturing the essence of everything they had become. "It's beautiful," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Lily." She smiled shyly, her cheeks flushing. "Do you think Mom would like it?" Jonathan nodded, pulling her into a gentle hug. "I know she would. She'd be so proud of you." In the quiet that followed, Jonathan felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. No matter what the future held, he knew he had done everything he could to create a life of love and security for Lily. And in doing so, he had found a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. Jonathan's health continued to improve steadily, though the process was slow and unpredictable. There were good days when he felt almost like himself again, walking with Lily in the park or sitting beside her as she worked on her art projects. Then there were bad days when fatigue overtook him, and he was confined to bed. On those days, Lily rarely left his side, bringing him water or reading aloud to fill the quiet. Her devotion to him touched Jonathan deeply, but he worried about the weight she carried. She had already experienced so much loss, and he didn't want her childhood overshadowed by his struggles. Yet, as much as he wanted to protect her, he couldn't deny how much her presence gave him strength. She had become the anchor in his life, a source of light in what could have been a very dark time. One morning, as Jonathan sat in the kitchen sipping his tea, Lily came bounding in with her sketchbook tucked under her arm. She looked more animated than usual, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Grandpa, I have an idea," she announced, pulling up a chair beside him. Jonathan smiled at her enthusiasm. "What's that, sweetheart?" She opened her sketchbook to a page filled with scribbles and outlines. "I want to make a mural," she said. "A big one, with colors and flowers and people. Like the picture I drew of you, me and Mom, but even bigger." Jonathan leaned forward, examining her sketches. "That sounds like a wonderful idea," he said. "Where were you thinking of putting it?" She hesitated, chewing her lip as she flipped through the pages of her sketchbook. "Maybe outside? Like on a wall where everyone can see it." Jonathan considered this for a moment. "I think that's a fantastic plan. We could even get the community involved. Make it a project for everyone." Lily's eyes lit up. "Really? You think people would want to help?" "I do," Jonathan said with certainty. "Art has a way of bringing people together, and I think your mural could do just that." The idea quickly gained momentum. Jonathan reached out to local organizations and businesses, explaining Lily's vision and securing permission to use a blank wall in a nearby park as their canvas. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many people eager to contribute supplies or lend a hand. Jonathan was careful to let Lily take the lead, encouraging her to share her ideas and make decisions about the design. As the project began to take shape, Lily's confidence blossomed. She worked tirelessly on her sketches, refining every detail until she was satisfied. She included elements that reflected her journey: a strong tree with deep roots, a sky filled with stars, and a field of vibrant wildflowers. In the center, she planned to depict three figures holding hands: a young girl, a woman, and an older man. It was a tribute to her family, past and present. On the day they started painting, volunteers of all ages gathered at the park. Buckets of brightly colored paint lined the edge of the wall, and brushes of every size were laid out on tables. Jonathan watched with pride as Lily stepped forward to address the group, her voice clear and steady despite her nervousness. "Thank you for being here," she said. "This mural is really special to me. It's about love and family and how people can grow together, even if they've been apart. I hope when you see it, it makes you feel happy." The crowd applauded warmly, and Jonathan felt a lump rise in his throat. He had watched Lily transform from a shy, uncertain child into a young girl filled with purpose and determination. She had taken the pain of her past and turned it into something beautiful, something that would inspire others. As the painting began, Jonathan joined in, carefully filling in sections under Lily's guidance. The work was tiring, but he found it invigorating, each brushstroke a reminder of the life they were building together. Neighbors stopped by to lend their support, and passers-by paused to admire the work in progress. Children laughed as they painted the lower sections, their enthusiasm infectious. Over the next several days, the mural came to life. The vibrant colors seemed to leap off the wall, each element infused with Lily's heart and vision. Jonathan spent hours by her side, watching her work with a focus and determination that reminded him so much of Emily. It was as if a part of his daughter lived on in Lily, not just in her features, but in her spirit. On the final day of the project, as the last strokes of paint were applied, a small crowd gathered to celebrate. Lily stood in front of the finished mural, her face glowing with pride as she took it all in. The figures in the center seemed to radiate warmth, their joined hands a symbol of connection and love. Jonathan stood beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It's beautiful, Lily," he said. "You've created something truly special." She looked up at him, her green eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you." Jonathan shook his head. "This was all you. Your vision, your hard work. I'm just lucky I got to be a part of it." The crowd clapped and cheered as Lily cut a ribbon to mark the mural's completion. People took photos, children posed in front of the wall, and conversations buzzed with admiration for her work. Lily beamed, soaking in the moment. Later that evening, as they walked home together, Lily reached for Jonathan's hand. "Do you think Mom can see the mural?" she asked softly. Jonathan squeezed her hand gently. "I think she can, and I think she's smiling right now. So proud of everything you've done." Lily smiled up at him, her steps light and carefree. "I hope so." As they approached the house, Jonathan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The mural was more than just a painting on a wall. It was a testament to everything they had overcome, a celebration of the family they had found in each other. For the first time in years, he felt whole. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Jonathan sat by the window, looking out at the stars. He thought of Emily, of the mistakes he had made and the lessons he had learned. He thought of Lily, her resilience and her love. And he thought of the future, uncertain but filled with possibility. He didn't know how much time he had left, but he knew one thing for certain. He would spend every moment he had making sure Lily knew she was loved, supported, and never alone. That, he realized, was the greatest legacy he could leave behind. The following months seemed to fly by, the days blending into one another as Jonathan continued to recover, though slowly. His treatments were still ongoing, and there were good days and bad days, but his spirit had never been stronger. He found new energy in his connection with Lily, and as they moved forward together, there was a sense of hope that pervaded every corner of their lives. The mural had been a turning point for both of them. It was no longer just an art project or a symbol of loss. It had become a representation of their healing. People from the neighborhood continued to visit the park, often leaving messages of support or even adding their own touches to the mural. Children drew flowers at the base of the wall, while others painted bright butterflies, creating a living, ever-changing masterpiece that reflected the heart of the community. One afternoon, as Jonathan and Lily were walking to the park to check on the mural, they passed a small cafe. Lily's eyes caught sight of a new flyer posted on the window. She stopped in her tracks, her gaze locked on the words printed in bold letters. Youth Art Exhibition. Open for submissions. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She had always loved art, and the idea of seeing her work on display was a dream she hadn't allowed herself to entertain. "Grandpa," she said, her voice a little shaky with excitement, I want to submit my artwork to the exhibition." Jonathan turned to see the flyer, his heart swelling with pride. "Lily, that's a wonderful idea. Your work deserves to be seen by everyone. But what if they don't like it?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Jonathan knelt down to her level, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Lily, art isn't about whether people like it or not. It's about expressing yourself, telling your story. And your art tells a beautiful story, one of love and resilience. You're sharing a piece of your heart with the world. That's all that matters." Lily's eyes softened, and she gave him a small nod. "Okay," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'll do it." Over the next few days, Jonathan and Lily worked together to choose her best pieces. Lily selected a collection of drawings that captured the essence of her journey. Portraits of the people she loved, the landscape of the park, and of course, the mural she had helped create. Jonathan was amazed at how much emotion was captured in each line, each brushstroke. The depth of her talent, which had once been hidden beneath layers of pain, was now impossible to ignore. They submitted the artwork to the exhibition, and within weeks, the date for the opening arrived. Lily was nervous, but Jonathan was there every step of the way, reassuring her that whatever happened, this was a moment to be proud of. The night of the exhibition, they arrived at the gallery, which was filled with families and artists milling about. Jonathan could feel Lily's nervous energy, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. He gave her a gentle nudge, a silent encouragement to move forward. "You've got this," he whispered. Lily smiled, though the nerves were still present. "Thanks, Grandpa." As they entered the room, they were greeted by the soft hum of conversation and the sound of footsteps on polished floors. The walls were lined with art in every style imaginable. The room was full of vibrant colors and striking imagery, but Jonathan couldn't help but notice how people's eyes kept drifting toward Lily's work. Her pieces stood out among the others, filled with emotion and story, like windows into her soul. They eventually made their way to the section where her drawings were displayed. Lily's pieces hung side by side, framed beautifully, each drawing carrying its own weight. As they stood there, a group of people stopped to admire the work. One woman leaned closer to a portrait of Lily's mother, tears glistening in her eyes. "This is incredible," she said to Lily, her voice filled with awe. "The way you've captured the light in her eyes. It's so powerful." Lily flushed with pride but remained silent, unsure how to respond. Jonathan, however, stepped in. "Lily has a remarkable talent," he said, his voice warm. "Her artwork tells a story of love, loss, and finding hope again." The woman smiled and nodded. "You should be very proud," she said to Lily. "You've created something that moves people." Lily smiled shyly, her cheeks still flushed. Jonathan watched, his heart swelling with emotion. He knew that this was just the beginning for her. This exhibition, this moment, was not only a celebration of her art, but a declaration of her strength and resilience. As the evening continued, more and more people came to see Lily's work. Some asked if she had more pieces on display, others asked about her process. For the first time in her life, Lily felt like she truly belonged, like her art had a place in the world. Later in the evening, as the crowd began to thin, Lily turned to Jonathan, her face glowing with joy. "Grandpa, I think people really like my art." Jonathan smiled, his heart full. "Lily, they don't just like it. They see you in it. They feel what you've created." Lily's eyes glistened with tears, but they were happy tears. "I think I'm starting to believe in myself." Jonathan pulled her into a tight hug, his heart overwhelmed with love. "You should. You've always had everything you needed inside you. You're stronger than you know, Lily." As they left the gallery, walking hand in hand into the crisp evening air, Jonathan knew that this was the turning point. Lily had found her voice through art, and through her art, she had found a place in the world. And Jonathan had found something just as precious: peace. knowing that he had helped her navigate her journey and that, despite the uncertainties of his own health, she was going to be okay. The future was still unknown, but it was filled with possibilities. Lily was not just a survivor of her past. She was a creator of her future. And Jonathan, for the first time in years, felt confident that she would continue to shine, no matter what came next. As the months passed, the vibrant energy of the art exhibition lingered in the air, and the changes in Lily became more apparent. Her confidence continued to grow, and it wasn't just in her art. She was now more comfortable in her own skin, more assured of her place in the world. The mural, the exhibition, and the support from Jonathan had sparked something deep within her, a sense of purpose that she carried with her every day. Jonathan, too, felt a shift in his life. The illness still loomed, but it no longer defined him. His days were filled with joy in the simple things. Watching Lily grow, listening to her stories, and spending time with the people who loved her. He had come to realize that his second chance at life wasn't just about healing his body. It was about healing the bonds that had been broken and making amends for the lost time with his daughter. Lily was, in many ways, the bridge between the past and the future. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jonathan turned to Lily, who was sketching in her notebook as usual. Her hair, now longer, caught the light, and her eyes shone with the quiet strength that he had come to admire. There was a peace about her that made Jonathan feel as though, despite everything that had happened, everything was going to be all right. "Lily," Jonathan said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. She looked up from her sketchbook, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "Yeah, Grandpa?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking about what you've accomplished, what we've accomplished really, and I'm just so proud of you. You've brought something into my life that I never thought I'd have again. You've given me a reason to hope, to believe in tomorrow." Lily blinked, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she put down her sketchbook and reached for his hand. "You did the same for me, Grandpa. I was lost before, and now I feel like I can be whoever I want to be." Jonathan squeezed her hand, his throat tight. "You can, Lily. You've always had that strength inside you. I've just been lucky enough to see it." They sat in quiet understanding, the weight of their words lingering between them, when the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the moment. Jonathan turned to see the familiar vehicle of a close friend, someone he hadn't seen in months. As the car came to a stop, a tall figure stepped out. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat when he saw the man's face. It was Thomas, an old colleague, someone who had been with Jonathan through the highs and lows of his business career, a man who had known him during some of the darkest times. Thomas approached slowly, a smile spreading across his face when he saw Jonathan sitting on the porch. "Jonathan, my old friend," he greeted warmly, extending a hand. Jonathan stood to shake his hand, his eyes wide with surprise. "Thomas, I didn't expect to see you here. What's going on?" Thomas shrugged, his smile still wide. "Well, you've been keeping things quiet, old man. I heard through the grapevine that you were doing well, and I figured I'd check in on you." Jonathan chuckled, gesturing for Thomas to sit. "You know how it is. I've been keeping a low profile, spending time with family." At the mention of family, Thomas's eyes flickered toward Lily, who had been quietly observing the conversation. Her gaze was curious but cautious, not sure how to place Thomas in the context of their lives. Jonathan noticed this and decided it was time to share. "Lily, this is Thomas," he said. "He's been a close friend of mine for many years." Lily gave a small wave, still unsure of what to make of the man who had appeared so suddenly in their lives. Thomas smiled warmly at her. "It's nice to meet you, Lily. I've heard a lot about you. Your artwork is incredible." Lily blushed slightly, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks," she said, her voice quiet but proud. As they settled in, Jonathan and Thomas began to catch up, sharing stories about old times, and as the conversation flowed, Thomas couldn't help but notice how much Jonathan had changed. There was a peace about him now, a calmness that hadn't been there before. It was clear that the time he had spent with Lily had given him a new lease on life. At some point during the evening, as the conversation shifted toward the past, Jonathan found himself explaining more about the family he had lost. He spoke of Emily with a tenderness that Thomas hadn't seen in him for years. For the first time, Jonathan openly acknowledged the mistakes he had made, the way he had let pride drive a wedge between him and his daughter. Thomas listened quietly, understanding the weight of what Jonathan was saying. When he spoke again, his tone was gentle but firm. "You've done what you can, Jonathan. You've made things right with Lily. I can see it. She's thriving, and so are you." Jonathan nodded slowly, but the guilt still lingered in his chest. "I just wish I had done more for Emily. I should have been there for her, especially when she needed me the most." Thomas leaned forward, his expression serious. "You can't change the past, Jonathan, but you can change the present. And from what I see, you've done that. You've given Lily a life she never could have imagined. And that's a gift, one that will last for her whole life." The words sank into Jonathan's heart, and for the first time, he allowed himself to truly believe them. He had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to give something meaningful to the world. Lily had come into his life at a time when he had thought all was lost, and now she was his greatest hope. As the evening wore on, and Thomas eventually bid them farewell, Jonathan and Lily stood together on the porch, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the sky. The night was peaceful, the air cool and crisp. Jonathan felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years, a quiet confidence that no matter what the future held, he and Lily would face it together. Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with the same quiet understanding that had become the foundation of their relationship. "Grandpa, I think everything is going to be okay." Jonathan smiled, his heart full. "I know it is, Lily. I know it is." The weeks that followed seemed to carry a sense of finality, though Jonathan wasn't ready to face it. His health had taken a sharp decline, the effects of the experimental treatment wearing off faster than expected. The strength he had regained seemed to fade in the blink of an eye, leaving him weaker and more fragile than before. Yet, despite the heavy toll on his body, his spirit remained unwavering. Each day with Lily felt like a gift, a treasure that he could not take for granted. He knew that time was slipping away, but he was determined to make these last moments count. Lily, too, had noticed the changes in Jonathan. She had become more attuned to his moods, his energy, and the subtle shifts in his condition. She would often stay by his side, holding his hand when he seemed distant or tired. Even when he tried to mask his pain, she could see through it, her young heart understanding far more than he realized. It was as if, despite their age difference, they had become two halves of the same whole. Her love for him was deep, unconditional, and it kept him tethered to the present, pushing him to stay as strong as he could for her. One afternoon, as Jonathan sat in his favorite chair by the window, watching the sun set behind the hills, Lily came into the room holding a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. Her eyes were filled with an excitement that Jonathan hadn't seen in a while, and for a moment, it lifted his spirits. She carefully placed the box on his lap, her fingers trembling slightly. "Grandpa, I want you to have this," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I made it for you." Jonathan looked down at the package, feeling a rush of affection for her. "What's inside?" he asked gently, reaching for the paper. "Open it," Lily urged with a smile that was both shy and hopeful. He unwrapped the paper carefully, finding a small wooden box inside. It was intricately carved, the design simple but beautiful, flowers and vines entwined around its edges. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat as he realized the significance of the box. It was a piece of art, one that echoed the design of the mural, a reflection of the love and care Lily had poured into every detail. Inside the box was a collection of tiny, delicate items, a collection of things that seemed to hold memories. There were small stones, each one painted with different patterns and colors, each one unique. There was a tiny bird made of clay, and a small folded piece of paper with a drawing of a tree. Jonathan's heart swelled as he examined each item, feeling the weight of Lily's love in every piece. "I made them all myself," Lily explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "The stones are like the ones we used in the mural. The bird is for hope, and the tree is for family." Jonathan looked up at her, his eyes misty. He could hardly speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Lily, this is beautiful. It's perfect, he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. Lily smiled, a sense of peace in her eyes. I wanted you to have something to remember me by, Grandpa. Something that will always remind you of us. Jonathan reached out, pulling her into a hug. He held her tightly, unwilling to let go, feeling her warmth against him. You've given me everything I could ever need, Lily. You are the greatest gift of my life. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in the quiet understanding that had become their bond. Time seemed to slow in that moment, as if the world outside had faded away, leaving only the two of them in their own little universe of love and memory. Later that evening, after dinner, Jonathan felt the familiar wave of fatigue wash over him. His body ached, and his mind was foggy, but he refused to show Lily his struggle. She had already carried so much, and he didn't want to add to her burdens. Instead, he gently guided her to the living room, where they sat by the fireplace, the flames casting soft shadows across the walls. Do you want to read me one of your stories, Grandpa? Lily asked, her voice light, as if trying to pull him back from the darkness he felt creeping in. Jonathan smiled, his heart full. Of course, he replied, his voice gentle. What story would you like to hear? Lily thought for a moment before picking up a book from the shelf. She handed it to him, and Jonathan opened the pages. As he began to read, the familiar cadence of his voice seemed to calm both of them. The words flowed easily, and the comfort of the ritual, reading to her as he had done for years, made the weight of the world seem a little lighter. When the story came to an end, Lily rested her head on his shoulder, her breathing slow and steady. Jonathan glanced down at her, his heart full of pride. She had become more than just his granddaughter. She was his anchor, the person who had pulled him back from the edge of despair, the reason he had fought so hard to live. As the night wore on, Jonathan's strength began to falter, and he knew that his time was coming to an end. He had never feared death, but now, with Lily beside him, he felt the sting of parting more than he ever thought possible. He wasn't ready to leave her. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. But he also knew that he had given her everything he could. He had shown her love, provided her with a foundation, and helped her find her voice. And he knew she would be okay. She would continue to grow, to create, to shine in ways that would make him proud. He had given her a family, a home, and a future. As he sat there with Lily, the weight of his final moments felt less like an end and more like a continuation. He had lived a full life, one that was rich with meaning because of the love he had found with his granddaughter. In her, he saw the legacy of his daughter, Emily, and the future they would both share, one full of hope, love, and art. Jonathan took a deep breath, closing his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace. He was ready. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. What would you do if you had the chance to reconnect with someone you love before it's too late? If you liked it, be sure to check out the upcoming videos on the channel. There are many more touching stories waiting for you.